Well, it's time to talk about the damage control after 4.0 through 4.3. By now we have an extremely different and relatively unbalanced meta, and the devs did not waste any time dropping patch 4.3.1 just about 2 weeks after the previous one. This almost exclusively focused on MPU changes. For buffs, Inkbrush's roll speed increase was higher and easier to use with lower amounts, E-Liter's extra range was increased from 3 to 5%, as well as also requiring less abilities, and this along with Charger's paint nerf started to give E-Liter more of an advantage in zones. Mini would get more of a charge with MPU and less of the ability required to trigger it as well. Everything else though is nerf related. Dooley and Hydra, I'm guessing Hydra has to be for low rank reasons because it was never a comp threat, had MPU toned down, with Dooley now requiring 3 mains and 2 subs instead of just 2 mains, which you think would be the final nail in the coffin for Dooley as it's already gotten too many nerfs, but we still got one more left down the line. Fizzy Bomb got a solid painting nerf, and Torp got most of its main nerfs, which wouldn't drop off Kunder yet, but it would make Torp less lethal and harder to spam. It would still be good though, and Ken's Undercover Umbrella is still going to be 180p for a while longer, which is one of the main reasons it stays as a solid threat. Bubble Blower also got some nerfs here, being a reduction to its lethal range, and finally, not lingering for an entire 18 seconds, but just 12. It's still an absurdly long time. Oh, and of course, Ballpoint. This weapon got a lot of fast nerfs. It now required more gear for 33.3, but it could still do it for now, run speed was less effective on it, and Ballpoint Nuvo was made 10 more points for special with Inkstorm. Nothing too major, the weapon's still broken. This meant that everything relatively stayed unchanged until the next patch. None of the nerfs were really too significant to drop anything off, and we go straight into 4.4. Here we have our second round of shooter buffs, with all of them getting 1 to 2 frames faster to shoot out of squid form, so being startup instead of end lag this time, with, once again, shorter range weapons getting more frames. In addition to that, Flings' vertical flick has more strafe speed and max damage range. Squiffer and E-Liter both get paints with their MPU effect, which would make Classic and New Squiffer solid options from here on out, and E-Liter the better zone charger from here on out. Since by now, if you wanted to get Ray, you would just pick C-Jet. Missiles would get a 15 frame recovery change, making them a little bit faster, and by now they're pretty much a strong special. Clearly fast enough to see use for their insane displacement and location. Booyah Bomb and Ultra Stamp would also finally get some major buffs here, with Stamp blocking shots better, swinging more, and moving faster into its rush mode from an aerial swing, as well as the outside damage being a 3-shot at 40 instead of a 4-shot at 30, as well as being able to move and turn faster. At this point, Stamp is a decent special. It wouldn't really be anything that spectacular in this game. Unlike Booyah Bomb, which would actually be broken. Booyah Bomb explodes faster, deals 32% more damage, paints more, paints under the Booyah Bomb user so they can move, as well as has the armor last 15 frames longer, finally stopping things like chargers and just taking them out upon landing. This made it one of the best specials in the game. Oh, and one more change, Inkrez now gave an extra 9 frames before you started taking damage with 1 sub, which of course did not do enough to stop MPU damage up, but it did make it at least a little bit less annoying. Anyway, from here we can finally get to the nerfs. H3D and Explosures are both going to get plus 10 points for special, while Machine gets plus 20. In case Doolies and Tetras weren't already dead, their standard fire now has a smaller hitbox, and finally is Ballpoint. This got a major damage nerf, which meant the short range mode would no longer one-hit armor, and it basically removed the ability to run 33.3 more consistently. It also got plus 30 points for special, making this our second ever 230 points for special weapon. On almost any other weapon, that'd probably be overkill. But for Ballpoint, while this still hurt, it was honestly probably still the best weapon in the entire game. We got a ways to go with that weapon's nerfs. I will say that these 2 patches are probably mostly a net positive. MPU is a lot less annoying even if it's still overall bad. Ballpoint, while still broken, is decently toned back, and while Booyah Bomb is a little too good right now, it did help new weapons feel more usable, such as Splattershot Pro. Leader would be a decent zones niche with the insane paint it has. Shooters did compete a bit better, but didn't take over yet as other strong options could keep up with them, mainly Brellas being very good at keeping them in check. What did end up finally being nerfed out of the meta is Dooley and Tetra. Tetra dealing with MPU weapons would already hinder it past this point, and Dooley just had so many back-to-back nerfs as well as MPU that it no longer became worth it. Neither weapon would be unviable or anything, but they're basically done being meta threats for the remainder of the game's life. So, GG's, Doolies, and Tetras, you had a good run. MPU weapons would sadly still gain popularity this patch, with Bamboo being used more for its strong effect against Brellas, which are continuing to get better in popularity. However though, the new main meta threat is Splattershot Pro, with Booyah Bomb being being very strong right now at a cheap 180p, and the MPU effect allowing it to shut down shorter range weapons than it, though midlines like H3 or Machine would still fare well into it, putting a bit more emphasis on mid-range comps in the game, which isn't a bad change to be honest. It's also worth noting that due to the nerfs of some other anchors, Explosion actually continued to gain popularity in zones despite the small points for special nerf. It meshed well with most weapons, and the massive paint, radius, and uptime it had gave it huge stalling power and high paint from a safe distance. And with that, we can jump straight to 4.5. This patch has even more shooter buffs, because we're gonna keep going for this, with all spray shooters now being 5 less waiting frames before recovering ink. Why? I don't know. None of them had problems with ink efficiency, like at all, but sure. 52 and 96 also dealt slightly better damage to wall, and a lot more damage to Brella shields, improving that matchup. Rapid's main power-up effect now gets the ability to increase its blast radius slightly as well, which a few subs would be standard on the weapon past this. Squeezer got similar buffs to the Gals, but also better damage to Booyah Baller and the Rainmaker shield. All rollers besides Dynamo, again, don't know why here, also got an extra 13% extra damage to the Brella shield, seeing a little bit of a pattern here. Tri-Slosher's middle hit got slightly more range, don't worry, it's still nothing like Launch Tri, and Mini gets faster running speed, charging speed, and can full jump when charged. Very nice buffs for the weapon. Besides that is just some sub-weapon buffs. Point Sensor is finally cheap enough to run 2 of, and Sprinkler can be used to paint under you, which is nice utility. Mainly though, the buffs here were just made to slightly nerf Brellas, mainly buffing Squeezer, Rapids, and especially Minis, with Mini being a good candidate for a meta slightly later down the line. There were a lot of important nerfs here as well though. H3D required 1 more sub of main power-up and was 10 more points more expensive for armor, wouldn't really change too much. Bamboo got object damage reductions to bring it a little bit more in line with MPU damage up, which much later down the line in Splatoon 3 would lead to Bamboo object damage being bad, and therefore Pencil, which is based off it, getting bad object damage in Splatoon 3. Very fun butterfly effect for a game that doesn't even have MPU. On the other side of nerfs, Explosher is finally up, getting a massive 30% ink consumption increase and a 7% smaller blast radius, as well as plus 10 points for special to Baller. This was a lot, but honestly Explo was still totally fine. Its paint from a far distance was still untouched in this patch, and a lot of main saver and eventually the LDE buff would help offset this a lot. Still had an impact though, of course. Another nerf that happened this patch was Inkstorm, which became 6% smaller radius-wise. Rain would no longer be amazing past this point, but it'd still be pretty good. I think this was mostly there to nerf Brella again, but there were other relevant rain weapons like Custom Dooley Squelcher. Finally though, the main nerf of this patch was K-Machine. This weapon became 20% more ink hungry with a 6% smaller blast radius, and the Fizzy second and third explosions would also get 60% smaller. Machine was done getting nerfs, but Fizzy Bomb was not. From here, Machine would be a solid weapon still, but it would begin to be overshadowed by a new Slosher coming just 1 patch later. Besides everything I mentioned when going over the patch, the only real developments here was NZAP, starting to become more of a staple support option after the nerfs to H3 and Kunder, as well as the buffs to shooters. Though with it being 210 points, which again, very high for Splatoon 2 standards, with no buffed last-ditch effort at this time, meant that Zap was actually quite a fair meta option. I don't think people really complained about it this time. Overall, I do think these recent 3 patches were a bit better for the game than previous. The damage control definitely shows a little bit, even if there's still some problems, but I do think this era of the game is really no one's favorite. However, there is one more big chance to really add to the game in a huge, meaningful way. The next patch up will also be the introduction of Sheldon's Picks, a surprise drop of 12 more third kits. We'll have to see if those can help turn things around. See you then.